You have wanted to strike back. You've wanted it more than once, in more than one situation, against more than one person. You have a story about why you didn't. The story is probably true. It is also not the most important thing about what happened. The most important thing is that you didn't, and what that cost the other person, not you, is what Machiavelli spent his life studying. Machiavelli studied restraint and found it was the most dangerous weapon available, not because it is virtuous, because it gives nothing away. This video will name what your non-response has communicated to the people who are watching, not what you intended, what it communicated. By the end, you will not be certain whether your restraint was wisdom or something you have not yet been willing to name. Machiavelli's argument about retaliation is precise and counterintuitive in equal measure. His starting premise is this: every response you give to an attack is information. It tells the attacker what matters to you. It tells them where your limits are. It tells them what you are willing to spend to defend a position. And it tells them, most usefully, what they can use against you next time. The person who strikes back, however justified, however proportionate, however satisfying, has given all of this information freely. They have handed the opponent a map. The person who does not strike back has given nothing. They remain illegible. And illegibility, in Machiavelli's framework, is the most powerful position available to anyone in a conflict. This is not a moral argument. Machiavelli was entirely indifferent to whether restraint was virtuous. He observed that it was strategically superior in almost every extended conflict, in almost every relationship where power was in contest, and he noted it with the same precision he applied to everything else he observed. The Roman historian Livy, whose work Machiavelli studied more carefully than almost any other source, recorded a pattern that Machiavelli found most instructive. The Roman generals who were most difficult to defeat were not the most aggressive. They were the most patient, not because patience was a virtue, but because patience deprived the enemy of information about when and how and where they would move. The aggressive general could be anticipated. The patient one could not. Machiavelli's conclusion was characteristically cold. The instinct to retaliate is the instinct to become legible. Every act of retaliation is an act of self-disclosure, and self-disclosure in a conflict is always a cost. The question he left open, and the question this video is built around, is not whether you should fight back. It is whether, when you didn't, you understood what you were doing. Because the strategic advantage of restraint exists regardless of why you exercised it. But the person who exercised it without understanding it has not gained the advantage. They have only avoided a cost. Those are not the same thing. In April 1478, the Pazzi family and their allies attempted to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother Giuliano in the Florence cathedral. Giuliano was killed. Lorenzo survived, wounded, and was locked inside the sacristy while the attack continued outside. What happened in the hours and days immediately after tells Machiavelli's story more precisely than anything he wrote himself. Lorenzo did not emerge from the sacristy in a rage. He did not make public declarations of vengeance. He did not immediately move against the conspirators. He went home. He let Florence come to him. In the following days, as the city turned against the Pazzi without Lorenzo having to direct it, as the conspirators were hunted down by Florentine citizens acting on their own outrage, Lorenzo watched. And then, at the moment of maximum advantage, when every action he took would be interpreted as justice rather than revenge, he moved. Machiavelli studied this in detail. The restraint in the hours after the attack was not patience. It was the most precise possible reading of what his non-response communicated to Florence. It communicated certainty. It communicated that he had not been destabilized. It communicated that he did not need to respond because the outcome was already determined. Machiavelli discourses the Romans, in the wars they were forced to fight, always tried to win by using the greatest possible force, having observed that wars are not won by half measures. The half measure, in Machiavelli's reading, is the immediate retaliation. It spends the force, it shows the hand. The full measure is the restraint that makes the eventual response inevitable and complete. Research on conflict escalation in long-term relationships, professional and personal, has documented a consistent asymmetry. In extended conflicts, the party that retaliates first almost always loses ground relative to the party that does not, even when the retaliation is proportionate, even when it is justified. The mechanism is straightforward. The retaliating party has demonstrated that the opponent's actions can produce a response. This is the most useful information the opponent can have. They now know that escalation produces results. They know what produces results: their own aggression. They know the retaliating party can be moved. The non-retaliating party has demonstrated none of these things. They may be planning a response. They may have already won. They may not care. The opponent cannot know. And uncertainty about the opponent's position is a form of disadvantage that compounds over time. You have been in extended conflicts, at work, in relationships, in family systems, where one party consistently did not respond to escalation. You remember how that felt. Not like winning, like fighting something that wouldn't engage. Example 3, the intimate. Think about the last time someone did something that deserved a response, not a catastrophic event, something specific, a slight, a betrayal at a small scale, something that, if you described it to someone who knew the context, they would agree warranted a response. You thought about what you would say, you rehearsed it. Several versions, and then you didn't say it. The story you told yourself about why varies. Maybe it wasn't worth the conflict. Maybe you were being the bigger person. Maybe you decided it wouldn't change anything. Maybe you were tired. Machiavelli's framework does not ask which of those was true. It notes only what your non-response communicated to the person who was watching, if they were watching carefully. And the people who wrong us are almost always watching carefully. They learned something. They learned that this particular action did not produce a response. That is either a strategic message or a permission, depending on whether you chose the non-response or defaulted into it. And now we need to stop talking about what other people communicated. There is a situation, specific, recent enough to have weight, where you did not strike back, and you have a story about why. The story is coherent. It holds together. It may even be largely true. Patience, wisdom, not wanting to lower yourself to their level, knowing that it wouldn't change anything. Being, as you have perhaps described it to yourself or to someone else, the bigger person. Machiavelli does not dispute any of these. He asks a different question entirely. When the moment came, when you had the opportunity to respond and chose not to, was it a decision? Not. Was the outcome correct? Not. Was the restraint admirable? Was it a decision, or was it something else? You felt the wanting to respond. You know what you would have said. There was a moment where the words were there. What stopped you? If the answer is, I understood that not responding was the strategically superior position, and I chose it, that is a decision. That is the restraint Machiavelli describes, the restraint that communicates certainty, that gives nothing away, that operates as power. But if the answer is something else, if it is closer to, I was afraid of the conflict, or I didn't think I would win, or I didn't believe my response would be taken seriously, or I'd already learned that responding to this person was pointless, then the non-response was not a power move. It was an accommodation. It looked identical from the outside. It communicated the same thing, but it came from a completely different place. And Machiavelli's most uncomfortable observation is this: the person who accommodates and the person who strategically restrains produce the same external result, but only one of them knows what they did. You have been in that situation more than once. In some of those situations, you were the person who chose. In others, and you know which ones, you were the person who didn't have the response available and called the absence of it something more flattering. The question that does not resolve is, which one was it this time? The specific situation you thought of when this video began. The story you told is not necessarily false, but it may be covering something you have not examined, something that is still there, still waiting, still in the hand that did not move. Machiavelli's answer to the question raised in Act 3 is not a reassurance. He does not distinguish between chosen restraint and default restraint and declare one admirable and the other not. He makes a more precise observation. The strategic value of restraint is identical, whether it was chosen or defaulted into. The external result, the information withheld, the position maintained, the opponent deprived of data, does not change based on why you did it. What changes is what is available to you going forward. The person who chose the restraint understands what they did. They can repeat it deliberately. They can vary it deliberately, choosing when to respond and when not to, based on what each response will communicate. They have the mechanism. The person who defaulted into restraint has the result, but not the mechanism. They achieved the strategically superior position by accident or by fear or by exhaustion. They cannot reliably reproduce it, and they are carrying something they have not yet accounted for. The unexpressed response, the unresolved wanting, the cost of the stillness. Machiavelli was precise about this cost. The general who restrains from strategy loses nothing in the restraint. The general who restrains from fear accumulates something, a debt of unreleased force that will find a release somewhere, in some form, at a moment that may not be chosen. He is not asking you to be the first kind of person. He is asking you to know which kind you have been. The hand on the stone. The question is not whether it moved. The question is, what is in it now? And whether that is the same thing that was in it when it stopped. Machiavelli had one final observation about people who mastered strategic restraint. It was not that they stopped feeling the wanting to respond. It was that they became precise about which responses, when finally given, would be the ones that mattered. The next question in this cluster is about that precision, about what it looks like to respond once, completely, after a long restraint, and what it does to the person on the receiving end, and to you.